I never thought I'd be the one sitting here telling a story like this. Funny how life works out. Or death, I guess. The year was 1968, April. I was 20 years old and had been in country for about 7 months by then. Not a lifer by any means, but not exactly a cherry F and G either. I'd seen some shit, you know? But not like what was coming. Wash. Pause. Before I get into what happened, I should back up a bit. Give you some context. Name's Richard Delmont, though everybody just called me Deli. Grew up in Lansing, Michigan. Typical Midwest kid. Dad worked at the auto plant. Mom was a school secretary. I had an older brother who'd already done his tour, came back in '66 with all his parts intact, thank God. I was studying engineering at Michigan State when my number came up in the draft. Never even thought about dodging it. That wasn't how I was raised. My dad and uncles had all served in World War II, and while they didn't talk about it much, there was this unspoken expectation, you know? You go when your country calls, period. Basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. Advanced individual training at Fort Polk. Then to Vietnam as part of the 1st Infantry Division. The big red one. We were operating mostly in the 3rd Corps, which is the area around Saigon. I was assigned to Charlie Company, 2nd Battalion. Long pause. When you first get to Nam, everything scares you. The heat hits you like a furnace when you step off the plane. The smells, fish sauce, garbage, diesel, jungle rot, they're like nothing back home. Everything's alien. But humans adapt, you know? After a few months, the fear changes. It doesn't go away, but it gets compartmentalized. I became a decent point man. Had good instincts for the jungle. Could spot tripwires, disturbed earth. Things that just didn't look right. The guys in my squad trusted me, which meant something. Our Lieutenant L.T. Pacheco, he was a good officer. Not some gung-ho West Pointer trying to get his ticket punched. He actually cared about keeping us alive. There was Martinez, we called him Martini, who was our radio man. Always had pictures of his girlfriend taped to his helmet. Jackson was our machine gunner. Big guy from Alabama who could carry that M60 like it was a toy. Bennett was our medic, quiet kid from Oregon who read poetry when we weren't on patrol. Cooper, O'Brien, Washington, and Nguyen, a South Vietnamese Kit Carson scout who knew the terrain better than any of us. That was our main squad. We'd go out on patrols, make contact sometimes, call in artillery or air support if things got hairy. Typical grunt stuff. Search and destroy. Clear and hold. Hearts and minds. Whatever the mission of the week was. Sigh. You know, the strange thing about war is how boring it can be. Hours, days of nothing happening, just humping through jungle, setting up ambushes that never get triggered, checking out villages where the VC had already disappeared. Then suddenly, in an instant, everything goes to hell. April 12th, 1968. I remember the date because it was my mom's birthday. I'd sent her a card the week before, hoping it would arrive on time. We were on a routine patrol, about 15 clicks west of Lai Khe, near the Cambodian border. Intelligence said there was increased NVA movement in the area, possibly preparing for another push toward Saigon. It had rained the night before, one of those tropical downpours that turns everything into mud. We'd been out for 3 days already, sleeping in shifts, eating cold sea rations. Everyone was tired, on edge. The jungle was quiet that morning, which always made me nervous. No birds, no monkeys. Like everything was holding its breath. I was on point, as usual. LT had the map out, checking our coordinates with Martini. We were supposed to rendezvous with another platoon by midday at a clearing marked on the map. I remember looking back at them, seeing Martini light a cigarette while LT frowned at him. "Put that shit out," he hissed. "You want to give away our position?" I turned back to the trail. Really just a narrow path through the dense foliage. Something felt off. I can't explain it better than that. Just a feeling in my gut. I held up my fist, the signal to stop. The column froze behind me. "What you got, Deli?" LT whispered, coming up beside me. I scanned the area. Nothing obvious. No tripwires. No freshly disturbed earth. No sign of punji stakes or other booby traps. Just jungle. But still that feeling. "Not sure, sir," I said. "Something doesn't feel right." LT nodded. He trusted my instincts. "Want to go around?" I looked at the dense vegetation on either side of the trail. Going off path would slow us down considerably, and we had that rendezvous to make. "Let me check it out first," I said. "This is the part where, if I could go back, I'd make a different call. But you don't get do-overs in life, or in death." I moved forward carefully, eyes scanning everything. The ground, the trees, the brush. Each step deliberate. Testing the ground before putting my full weight down. Standard procedure. I remember hearing a bird call suddenly break the silence. I glanced up reflexively. That was all it took. One moment of distraction. My next step, I felt the ground give slightly beneath my boot. Not much, just enough. There was a metallic click. In that millisecond, I knew. Before my brain could even form the word mine, I knew. They say your life flashes before your eyes when you're about to die. That's not what happened to me. What flashed through my mind was much simpler. Well, shit. The blast threw me into the air. It wasn't like in the movies where everything goes slow motion. It was instant, deafening. 1 second I was standing on the trail, the next I was flying. I don't remember landing. Don't remember the pain, though it must have been excruciating. The next thing I was aware of was lying on my back, staring up at patches of sky through the jungle canopy. I couldn't hear anything except a high-pitched ringing. I tried to move but couldn't. Tried to call out but couldn't tell if any sound came out. Faces appeared above me. Martinez, Jackson, Bennett. Their mouths were moving, but I couldn't hear them. Bennett was working frantically on my lower body, his hands covered in blood. My blood, I realized. LT was there too, yelling into the radio. Calling in a medevac, I assumed. His face was spattered with something dark. Blood? Mud? I couldn't tell. I tried to ask what happened, how bad it was, but I'm not sure if the words actually came out. Bennett looked at me, then at LT, and shook his head slightly. That's when I knew. This wasn't something a medic could patch up. The weird thing was, I didn't feel scared. Just confused. Detached. Like I was watching it all happen to someone else. Bennett jabbed something into my arm. Morphine, probably. The jungle started to swirl around me. The faces above me blurred. The patches of sky seemed to pulse, growing brighter then darker. I remember thinking about my mom, how she'd be getting that birthday card any day now, and how soon after she'd be getting a very different kind of message about her son. Then the light changed. Not gradually, but all at once. One moment I was looking up at the jungle canopy. The next I was somewhere else. Long pause. This is the part that's hardest to describe. The part that people either don't believe or try to fit into whatever they already think about the afterlife. But I'm just going to tell you what I experienced. Make of it what you will. The first thing I noticed was the silence. After the chaos of the explosion, the shouting, the ringing in my ears, the absolute silence was startling. Not just quiet, but a complete absence of sound. Like sound itself didn't exist as a concept anymore. The second thing was the darkness. But not darkness, like a night without stars or a room with the lights off. It's hard to explain. It wasn't the presence of darkness. It was the absence of anything else. No light, no shapes, no up or down. And yet, and this is the paradox, I could somehow see. Not with my eyes, I don't think. But I was aware of my surroundings in a way that was like seeing, but wasn't quite that. I wasn't in my body anymore. At least not the body I'd known. I had no sensation of weight or substance. No pain. The pain from the mind was gone completely. No heartbeat, no breathing. Yet I existed. I was conscious. I was me. Just not physically me. How long I remained in that state, I can't say. Time didn't seem to work the same way. It could have been seconds or centuries. Then movement. Not my own. Something else. Someone else? I sensed rather than saw others around me. Presences. Entities. Not human. Not animal. Not anything I had words for. I wasn't afraid. That's another strange thing. In a situation that should have been terrifying, being dead, being in some unknown place, being surrounded by unknown beings, I felt no fear. None at all. Just curiosity. Wonder. One of the presences drew closer. I can't describe its appearance because it didn't really have one. Or rather, its appearance wasn't something my mind could translate into visual terms. It was more like a concentration of energy, a pattern, a vibration. It communicated with me, not in words or images, but directly into my consciousness. Again, it's difficult to translate, but the essence was, you are here before your time. I tried to respond, to ask where here was what had happened to me. But before I could, everything shifted again. Suddenly I was moving, or the space around me was moving. Like being pulled through a tunnel at impossible speed. The darkness gave way to swirls of color. Colors I'd never seen before. Colors that don't exist in our world. And then I was somewhere else entirely. Pause. If I had to give this place a name, I'd call it the Borderlands. Not heaven, not hell, not purgatory or nirvana, or any other religious concept I'd ever heard of. It was like a nexus, a meeting point, a place between places. It had form and substance now. I could see landscapes, but they shifted and changed as I looked at them. Mountains that flowed like water, forests whose trees were made of light, oceans of what looked like liquid crystal. And there were beings here. Some looked vaguely human, others completely alien. Some I could see clearly, others were just suggestions of form, impressions at the edge of perception. Among them I recognized faces. People from my unit who had died. Peterson, who'd been hit by sniper fire 2 months earlier. Ramirez killed in an ambush our first week in country. They looked at me with recognition but didn't speak. Then someone approached who I did recognize clearly. My grandfather, who died when I was 12. He looked exactly as I remembered him. Tall, thin, with those wire-rimmed glasses and that small smile that always made you feel like he knew something you didn't. "Grandpa," I said, and was surprised to hear my own voice. I had a voice here. "Hello, Richard," he said. His voice was just as I remembered too. That slight Midwestern drawl. "Bit of a surprise to see you here so soon." "Am I dead?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Yes and no," he said. "You're at the threshold, the in-between place." "I stepped on a mine," I told him, as if he might not know. He nodded. "I know, son. I saw. Is this heaven?" I asked. He chuckled, that same warm laugh I remembered from childhood. "No, not heaven. Not as you were taught to think of it anyway. This is just one layer, one region of what comes after. There are many others. So the Christians got it wrong? And the Buddhists and Muslims and everyone else? Not wrong," he said thoughtfully. "Sure are just incomplete. Like blind men describing an elephant by touch. Each one gets a piece of the truth, but none sees the whole." I looked around at the shifting landscape, the strange beings. "So what is the truth? What is this place really?" "It's a transition," another voice said. I turned to see a woman standing beside my grandfather. She wasn't anyone I recognized, middle-aged, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to contain galaxies. "All souls pass through here," she continued. "Some stay longer than others. Some move on to other realms. Some return." "Return?" I asked. "You mean, go back? To life?" She nodded. "If it's not truly their time, or if they have something left to complete." "Like what?" "A message to deliver," she said. "A truth to share. A life to save. Everyone's purpose is different." I thought about my squad, about the mine that had killed me. "Can I go back? Is that possible?" My grandfather and the woman exchanged a glance. "It's possible," my grandfather said carefully, "but not simple. And not without cost." "What cost?" "Going back means leaving here," the woman said. "And the journey back is not easy. There is pain, confusion, and you would return changed." "Changed how?" "Those who go back and forth across the threshold never fully belong to either world again," she explained. "You would have one foot in life and one in death. You would see things others cannot, know things others do not. It is a burden. I considered this. But I could see my family again? My friends? Yes," my grandfather said. "Though they might not understand what happened to you, what you've become, and there would be a purpose?" I asked. "Some reason for me to go back?" The woman nodded solemnly. "There is always a purpose, though you may not understand it fully until you've fulfilled it." I looked out at the strange, beautiful landscape again. Part of me wanted to stay, to explore this place, to learn its secrets. But another part, the part that still felt connected to life, to Earth, pulled me back. "I think I want to go back," I said finally. "If I can," my grandfather smiled sadly. "I thought you might say that. You always were stubborn. Before you decide," the woman said, "there's something you should see." She gestured, and the landscape around us changed. Suddenly we were standing, or floating, I couldn't really tell, above a military hospital. I recognized it immediately as the 93rd Evacuation Hospital at Long Bin. I'd been there once before, visiting a buddy who'd taken shrapnel in the shoulder. Below us on an operating table was a body, my body, mangled, bloody, barely recognizable. Doctors in surgical gowns worked frantically, hands moving with practiced precision. One was pressing paddles to my chest, defibrillator. "Is that now?" I asked, horrified and fascinated at once. "Yes," the woman said. "This is happening at this moment. Your physical form is on the edge." I watched as one of the doctors shook his head, said something to the others. They stepped back, shoulders slumping in defeat. "They're giving up," I said. "They believe you're beyond saving," my grandfather confirmed. "And by normal medical understanding, they're right. So how could I go back? If my body is..." The connection between body and soul is more flexible than most understand. The woman said, if your will is strong enough, if your purpose is clear enough, a return is possible even from this point. I continued watching the scene below. One of the doctors glanced at his watch, preparing to call time of death. A nurse began to cover my body with a sheet. I have to decide now, don't I? I asked. They both nodded. What about my legs? I could see enough of my body to know that both legs were gone below the knee. If you return to what remains, my grandfather said gently. The physical damage is done. I took that in. A lifetime without legs, prosthetics, rehabilitation. Challenges I couldn't even imagine yet. But I'd be alive, I said, more to myself than to them. Yes, the woman said. You would have life, however difficult. I made my decision. I want to go back. Are you certain? My grandfather asked, his eyes full of something like concern. The path back is hard, and what waits for you there is harder still. I'm sure, I said, surprising myself with my conviction. I'm not finished yet. The woman nodded, as if she'd expected this answer all along. Then there is something you must take with you, a message. What message? That what lies beyond death is greater and stranger than any religion has captured. She said, that the divisions we create in life, between faiths, between peoples, mean nothing here. That consciousness continues. That love continues. That purpose continues. That's the message? That's why I get to go back? Part of it, she said. The rest you will discover as you live. My grandfather put his hand on my shoulder. I could feel it, solid and warm. I'm proud of you, Richard, he said. But before you go, there's more you should see. More you should understand about this place. What do you mean? He gestured around us. This is just the beginning. There are depths to this reality you haven't glimpsed yet. Show me, I said. And so they did. Pause. We moved through the borderlands, my grandfather and the mysterious woman guiding me. The landscape continued to shift and change around us, but now with purpose, as if responding to their will rather than randomly. We came to what appeared to be a vast city, though city isn't really the right word. It was a complex structure of interconnected spaces, some enclosed, some open, some existing in dimensions I couldn't fully perceive. It gleamed with an inner light, its architecture unlike anything on Earth, fluid, organic, yet mathematically precise. What is this place? I asked. A gathering place, the woman said. One of many. Souls come here to learn, to heal, to prepare. Prepare for what? For whatever comes next, my grandfather said. Some move on to other realms of existence. Some prepare to return to physical life. Some remain here as guides for new arrivals. As we moved through this impossible city, I saw countless beings. Some appeared human, from all eras and origins. I saw what looked like ancient Romans, medieval Europeans, people in 20th century dress, and others in clothing I didn't recognize, perhaps from the future. Others were clearly not human at all, their forms either completely alien or only vaguely humanoid. Yet despite their differences, they all seemed to communicate easily. There was a sense of harmony, of understanding that transcended language or form. They're all together, I said, struggling to articulate my surprise. No separation, no conflict. The divisions of the physical world don't apply here, the woman explained. No nations, no religions, no races. Those are constructs of the material plane, useful perhaps for the game of physical existence, but meaningless beyond it. The game, I questioned. Life, my grandfather clarified. It's not quite a game, but it's not as serious as most people think either. It's an experience, a classroom perhaps. We continued through the city until we reached what seemed to be its center, a vast open space surrounding a structure that defied description. It was like a temple, a power plant, and a living organism all at once. Energy flowed visibly through and around it in patterns of light. This is the nexus, the woman said, a connection point between this realm and others. Others? There are more places than this? She smiled. Many more, infinite more potentially. This is just one level of reality. My mind struggled to comprehend. So after we die, we come here and then... It depends, my grandfather said. Some souls need healing first. Some need to understand the life they just lived, its purpose, its lessons. Some need to reconnect with others they've known through many lives. Many lives? I seized on that. You mean reincarnation is real? In a sense, the woman said, though not exactly as Eastern religions describe it. It's more complex, more varied. Some souls choose to experience many physical lives. Others, only a few. Some move on to non-physical realms and experiences. My head was spinning, metaphorically, since I didn't actually have a head in this state. So what's the point of it all? Why the physical lives? Why Earth? They exchanged a glance again. That look of adults deciding how much to explain to a child. The physical realm offers unique opportunities for growth. The woman said finally, limitation creates challenge. Challenge creates growth. The density and restriction of physical existence allows for experiences that aren't possible in more fluid realms. Like what? Like forgetting, my grandfather said. In physical life, you forget your true nature, your past experiences, the vastness of what you are. That forgetting creates a particular kind of experience. Authentic, immediate, intense, and painful, I added, thinking of the war, of the mine, of all the suffering I'd seen. Yes, the woman acknowledged. Pain is part of the physical experience, but so is joy, love, wonder, all felt with an intensity that's unique to embodied consciousness. I tried to process all this. It contradicted so much of what I'd been taught about the afterlife, about God, about the meaning of existence. Is there a God? I asked finally, the question that had been building in me. They both smiled as if they'd been waiting for this. What you're really asking, the woman said gently, is whether there's a bearded man sitting on a throne passing judgment. The answer to that is no. But, my grandfather added, if you're asking whether there's a creative intelligence underlying all reality, a consciousness greater than our individual awareness, then yes, absolutely yes. The source, the woman said. The all, the one. Different traditions have different names for it, but they're all pointing at the same reality. Can I see it? The source? They exchanged another glance. In your current state, the woman said carefully, you could perceive only the merest fraction, and even that might be overwhelming. I want to try, I insisted. My grandfather looked concerned. Richard, if you're going back, and you've said you want to, there are things that human consciousness isn't meant to fully retain. Glimpsing the source directly might make it impossible for you to function in physical reality again. A partial glimpse, then, I bargained, just enough to understand. After a moment, they both nodded. Come, the woman said, leading me toward the strange structure at the center of the space. As we approached, the energy patterns grew more intense, more complex. Colors I still had no names for swirled and danced through the air. The closer we got, the more I felt a building sense of something. Not exactly pressure, not exactly sound, not exactly light, but elements of all three and more besides. This is as close as we should go, my grandfather said, stopping a short distance from the structure. Now, the woman instructed, open your awareness. Not your eyes, you don't have those here, but your perception, your consciousness itself. I did as she suggested, focusing my attention on the swirling energies before me, allowing my awareness to expand beyond what felt like my boundaries. What happened next is almost impossible to describe. Imagine suddenly perceiving everything, not just what's in front of you, but all directions at once. Not just what's happening now, but what has happened and what will happen. Not just this place, but all places. For an instant, though instant, doesn't really apply since time itself seemed to dissolve. I was connected to everything, every person who had ever lived or would live, every creature, every particle of existence, and through it all ran a current of, the only word I have is love, but that's hopelessly inadequate. It was as if love was the fundamental force holding reality together, more basic than gravity or electromagnetism. It wasn't chaotic, this connection to everything. There was a pattern, a purpose, an intelligence to it, not controlling, not dictating, but guiding, creating conditions for growth and experience while honoring the free will of every conscious entity. I understood in that moment that everything was connected, part of a vast, complex, beautiful whole, that nobody was ever truly alone, that nothing was ever truly lost. And then as suddenly as it had begun, the experience ended. I found myself back with my grandfather and the woman, at a distance from the central structure. I was not shaking, since I had no body to shake, but vibrating somehow with the intensity of what I'd experienced. I couldn't find words. A glimpse, the woman said simply. The merest glimpse. How can I possibly go back to normal life after seeing that? I wondered aloud. You won't remember it fully, my grandfather said gently. You can't. Your physical brain couldn't process it. But the essence will remain with you. The knowing underneath everything else. The message, the woman reminded me, that's what you'll carry back clearly. That what lies beyond is greater than our religions have captured. That we are all connected in ways we can barely comprehend. I nodded, still overwhelmed by what I'd experienced. There's more I want to show you, my grandfather said. If you're willing, things about this realm that might help you understand your purpose when you return. Show me, I said again, everything you can. And so our journey through the borderlands continued. Pause. We moved away from the central nexus, traveling to what I can only describe as different regions or districts of this vast place. Each had its own character, its own purpose, though all were part of the greater whole. We came to an area that resembled a vast library, though the books were spheres of light that contained what seemed to be complete experiences rather than just words. Beings of all types moved among these spheres, selecting them and somehow absorbing their contents. The Hall of Records, the woman explained. Every life, every experience is preserved here. Can I see mine? I asked. You already are your own record, my grandfather said. But yes, we can show you a different perspective on your life. He guided me to one of the spheres. As we approached, it grew larger, or perhaps we grew smaller. Scale and proportion seemed fluid here. Soon the sphere surrounded us, and I found myself watching scenes from my own life, from my earliest memories through to the moment of the mine explosion. But I wasn't just seeing these events. I was experiencing them from multiple perspectives simultaneously. I could feel what my parents felt when I was born, what my teachers thought when I struggled or succeeded in school, what my friends experienced in our interactions, what the enemy soldiers felt as they planted the mine that would kill me. Most disturbingly, I could see the patterns, how certain choices led to certain outcomes, how moments I thought were random or meaningless actually set up important developments later. I could see how my life intersected with others in ways I'd never noticed, creating ripples of influence I'd been unaware of. Everyone's life looks like this, the woman said, sensing my amazement. Every life is more significant than the person living it can possibly realize. When the review of my life ended, we moved on to another area. This one appeared as a vast healing center. Souls who seemed damaged or distressed somehow were being tended to by others. The healing wasn't physical. There were no bandages or medicines, but rather energetic, with patterns of light flowing between the healers and those being healed. Some souls arrive here in need of significant healing, my grandfather explained, especially those who experience great trauma or who caused great harm to others. Those who caused harm? I asked, surprised. You mean bad people? The woman gave me a look of gentle correction. There are no bad people, only damaged souls who made harmful choices. Everyone here is on the same journey ultimately. Even people like Hitler or the Viet Cong who planted the mine that killed me. I couldn't keep the edge from my voice. Especially souls like those, she said firmly. The more harm one has caused, the more healing and understanding is needed afterward. But all souls originate from the same source, and all eventually return to wholeness. This was hard for me to accept. In the black and white thinking of war, there were good guys and bad guys, allies and enemies. The idea that ultimately we were all the same, all connected, all worthy of healing, it challenged everything I thought I knew about justice. We continued to another region where souls appeared to be preparing for something. There was an atmosphere of anticipation, of planning. These souls are preparing to return to physical life, my grandfather said. Some for the first time, others for another experience. I watched as groups of souls worked together, seemingly mapping out connections and events. They're planning their lives, I asked, incredulous. Not in detail, the woman clarified. More like setting up key challenges, relationships, and opportunities for growth. The specific choices will still be made in the moment once they're embodied. So we choose our lives, our families, even our deaths. In broad strokes, yes, she said. Though once in physical form, with its limitations and forgetting, those pre-birth choices become more like subconscious impulses or inexplicable attractions towards certain paths. I thought about my own life, my draft notice, my decision not to dodge it, my assignment to Vietnam, my role as point man, the mine. Had I somehow chosen all of that at some level? It's not deterministic, my grandfather said, sensing my thoughts. You always had free will within the parameters of your life situation. But certain themes, certain challenges, yes, those were chosen before your birth as opportunities for growth. For what purpose? I asked. Why choose difficulty and pain? For the same reason anyone seeks challenge. The woman said, because overcoming difficulty creates strength, wisdom, compassion. Because contrast, pleasure and pain, love and fear, peace and conflict, creates the fullest experience. While I pondered this, we moved on again, to what appeared to be a kind of transit center. Souls were coming and going through what looked like portals of light, each leading to somewhere else. Connections to other realms, the woman explained. Other levels of reality, other dimensions of experience. Where do they lead? Everywhere, she said simply. To physical worlds like Earth but different. To non-physical realms of pure concept or emotion. To places so unlike your reality that I couldn't describe them in terms you'd understand. And souls just travel between them? Those who are ready, my grandfather said. Those who have balanced their experiences and are prepared for new forms of growth. I felt dizzy with the scale of it all. The complexity, the vastness. My human mind, or whatever remained of it in this state, struggled to comprehend the implications. There's so much more than I ever imagined, I said finally. They both nodded. That's part of the message you'll take back. The woman said, the universe, reality itself, is far vaster, far more complex, far more beautiful than most humans allow themselves to believe. We returned to a quieter area, something like a garden, though the plants were forms of light and energy rather than physical vegetation. Here we sat, or existed, since sitting implies bodies, in a peaceful silence for what might have been moments or eons. Finally, I asked the question that had been forming in me through all of these revelations. Why me? Why am I being allowed to go back when so many others don't? What makes me special? My grandfather smiled. It's not about being special, Richard. It's about timing, purpose, and choice. I don't understand. Your physical body is damaged, but not beyond the point of supporting consciousness, the woman said. That's the timing aspect. The window is still open, barely. Your particular experiences here give you a message that's needed in your time and place. That's the purpose. And you've chosen to return rather than move on. That's the choice. All three must align for a return to be possible. And the cost? I remembered she had mentioned there would be a cost. You will live between worlds, she said solemnly. You will remember enough of this place to never fully belong in physical reality again. You will see and know things that others don't, which can be isolating. Your injuries will be substantial, your recovery difficult, and you will carry the responsibility of the message you've been given. I considered all this. It was a heavy burden, but compared to what I'd seen, what I now understood about the nature of reality, it seemed worth it. I'm still willing, I said. I want to go back. My grandfather put his hand on my shoulder again. There's one more thing you should know then. The journey back, it won't be easy or pleasant. What do you mean? The transition between this state and physical consciousness is difficult, the woman explained. The compression of awareness, the restriction back into form, the return of physical sensation, including pain. It can be traumatic. I can handle it, I said with more confidence than I felt. You also won't remember everything right away, my grandfather added. Some aspects of your experience here will return over time, through dreams, through moments of recognition. Others may never fully translate into your human awareness. I nodded my understanding. But the message, the essential truth, I'll remember that? Yes, the woman assured me. That will remain clear. Then I'm ready, I said. My grandfather embraced me. It wasn't a physical embrace, but I felt his love, his pride, his essence merging with mine briefly. Until we meet again, he said. And we will. This isn't goodbye. The woman placed what felt like a hand on my head. Remember, she said, remember that love is the foundation. Remember that we are all connected. Remember that what awaits is greater than fear. I felt myself beginning to move away from them, being drawn back toward something, a pull inexorable and powerful. Wait, I called. I don't even know your name, I said to the woman. She smiled, and in that smile, I suddenly recognized something familiar, something I should have seen all along. I have been known by many names, she said, but you once called me great-grandmother. And then the pulling sensation intensified. The borderlands began to fade around me. The colors swirled, twisted, darkened. The presences of my grandfather and great-grandmother receded. I was traveling through darkness again, but not the peaceful, silent darkness of before. This darkness roared. It pressed in on me from all sides. It fragmented my awareness, breaking apart the expanded consciousness I had experienced. I was being compressed, confined, restricted. It was like being forced through an opening far too small, every part of me screaming in protest. And then came the pain. Physical sensation returned in an overwhelming wave. Every nerve ending seemed to fire at once. My body, I had a body again, was a massive agony. The pain was so intense, so all-consuming that it obliterated thought, memory, identity. For a moment, or an eternity, there was nothing but pain. Then gradually other sensations emerged. Sounds, beeping machines, urgent voices. Smells, antiseptic, blood, sweat. Touch, rough sheets, something in my throat, needles in my arms. I tried to open my eyes but couldn't. Tried to speak but couldn't. Tried to move but couldn't. But I could hear. Fragments of conversation reached me through the fog of pain and confusion. "Oh, impossible. He was flatlined for." Her pupils responsive, got a rhythm back. "A complete miracle. Never seen anything." "Severe trauma, both legs, internal bleeding." I drifted in and out of awareness. The pain receding only when drugs pulled me under, returning full force when they wore off. Time lost all meaning again, but in a different way than in the borderlands. Here it was fragmented, discontinuous, measured in intervals of pain and relief. Throughout it all, I clung to one certainty. I had returned for a reason. I had a message to deliver. Something important that people needed to hear. Something about what waited beyond death being different, greater than our religions had captured. Something about connection, about love as the foundation of reality. The details were already fading, like water through my fingers. But the essence remained. I held on to it fiercely as I drifted in and out of consciousness. I had died. I had gone somewhere else. I had seen things beyond human understanding, and I had come back to tell about it. That was my purpose now. My mission. If I survived this pain, this broken body, this difficult return, I would share what I had learned. I would deliver the message I had been given, no matter what it cost me. Long pause. I don't know how long I was unconscious. Days, at least. When I finally opened my eyes, I was in a hospital room. Not the field hospital in Vietnam, but somewhere else. The ceiling was different. The sounds were different. The air felt different. A nurse noticed I was awake and hurried over. Young woman, black hair pulled back tight, exhaustion around her eyes. "Welcome back," she said, checking the IV in my arm. "You're at Tripler Army Medical Center in Hawaii. You're going to be okay." I tried to speak but couldn't. There was a tube down my throat. I panicked for a moment, my hands trying to reach for it, but they wouldn't move right. Everything felt wrong, distant, like my body wasn't fully mine anymore. "Easy," she said, putting a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You're intubated to help you breathe. The doctor will be here soon to check if we can remove it." I blinked slowly, trying to communicate, to ask about what had happened. About my legs, about my unit. "You've been through a lot," she continued, seeming to understand my unspoken questions. "You were badly injured. They didn't expect you to make it, but here you are. Your family has been notified. They're trying to arrange to come see you." Family. My mom and dad. My brother. What would they think when they saw me? When they learned about my legs? My legs. I couldn't feel them. Or rather, I felt them, but in a way that made no sense. Phantom sensations. Pain where there shouldn't be, couldn't be pain anymore. The doctor came in shortly after, a tall man with silver hair and glasses. He examined me, checked my vitals, looked at my chart. "Remarkable," he kept saying. "Simply remarkable." They removed the breathing tube that day. My throat felt raw, my voice a scratchy whisper when I finally could speak. "My squad?" was the first thing I asked. The doctor and nurse exchanged glances. "We can talk about that when you're stronger," the doctor said. "Now," I insisted, my voice barely audible. "Please." The nurse sighed and nodded. "Your unit got hit pretty hard that day. The mine you triggered was just the first. There was an ambush." My heart sank. "How many?" "3 dead, including your lieutenant. 4 others wounded, but they'll recover." I closed my eyes, letting the grief wash over me. "El Tipacheco." "Who else?" I wanted to ask for names, but didn't have the strength. "Rest now," the doctor said. "You've got a long recovery ahead. We'll talk more later." Over the next few days, I drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain was managed with morphine, which kept me foggy but functional. Bit by bit, I learned what had happened to me. Both legs gone below the knee. Severe internal injuries. Multiple surgeries. Massive blood loss. Clinical death for nearly 6 minutes before they somehow got me back. 6 minutes. It had felt like an eternity in that other place. The borderlands, as my guides had called it. Already the details were fading, but the core of it remained vivid. The beings I'd met, the places I'd seen, the fundamental truths I'd glimpsed. I tried to tell the nurse about it one night when she was changing my bandages. Her name was Angela, I'd learned. I went somewhere. I said, my voice stronger now, but still rough. When I was, dead, she smiled politely. Many patients report experiences like that. It's common with trauma and blood loss. No, this was real, I insisted. I saw my grandfather and my great-grandmother. They showed me things, told me things. Angela nodded, still with that same polite smile. The mind creates powerful hallucinations under stress. It's the brain's way of coping. It wasn't a hallucination, I said, but could hear how it sounded. How could I possibly convince her or anyone of what I'd experienced? The words themselves seemed inadequate, like trying to describe color to someone who'd been blind from birth. After about a week, I was stable enough for a transfer. They were sending me back to the States, to Walter Reed Army Hospital in Washington, D.C. The wounds were too severe, the recovery too complex for me to stay in the Pacific Theater. The flight was a blur of medication and pain. I remember being loaded onto the hospital plane, strapped to a gurney, surrounded by other wounded men in various states of injury. Some moaned in pain, others stared silently at nothing. All of us broken in ways that would never fully heal. Walter Reed was where the real work began. Once I was stable enough, they started me on physical therapy, learning to sit up again, to use my arms to compensate for my missing legs, to prepare for eventual prosthetics. The physical therapist was a no-nonsense Army captain named Rodriguez. I don't care what you can't do, she'd say. Show me what you can do, and we'll build from there. I worked until I was drenched in sweat every day, pushed myself beyond what I thought possible, not out of courage or determination, really, but because I felt I had to justify my return. If I'd been allowed to come back, if I'd been given this second chance when others hadn't, there had to be a reason. I had to make it count. My parents arrived about 2 weeks after I got to Walter Reed. I'll never forget the look on my mother's face when she first saw me. She tried to hide it, but that initial shock, the realization that her son was now half the man he had been, it cut through me like a knife. She recovered quickly, though, came to my bedside and held my hand like I was a little boy again. My brave boy, she kept saying, tears streaming down her face. My brave, brave boy. My father stood behind her, stoic as always, but I could see the pain in his eyes. He'd served in the Pacific in World War II, had seen men wounded as badly as me. He understood what lay ahead better than my mother did. You're going to be okay, son, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. We'll get through this. My brother couldn't come right away. He was working on an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico and couldn't get leave immediately. But he called the hospital, and they brought a phone to my bed. Jesus, Deli, he said when I told him about my legs. That's rough. But hey, at least you're alive, right? That's what matters. Alive, yes. But changed in ways I couldn't begin to explain to him over a crackling phone line. As my physical recovery progressed, I found myself increasingly preoccupied with my experience in the borderlands. The details were fading over time, like a dream upon waking, but certain aspects remained crystal clear. The message I was supposed to bring back, the understanding that reality was far vaster than our religions described, the certainty that consciousness continued after death. I tried talking about it with the Army psychiatrist who visited me regularly. Dr. Klein was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a perpetually concerned expression. It's common for soldiers who've had close calls to develop spiritual interpretations of their experiences, she said when I described what I'd seen. This wasn't an interpretation, I insisted. I was there. It was more real than this room is right now. She made notes in her little book. The near-death experience is a documented phenomenon. The tunnel, the light, seeing deceased loved ones, these are all typical elements of the NDE. The brain does fascinating things when deprived of oxygen. It wasn't just my brain. I said frustration building. It was something else, something beyond physical reality. And that's a perfectly valid way for you to process what happened. She said in that same measured clinical tone. Many people find comfort in spiritual explanations. I gave up trying to convince her. How could I explain colors that didn't exist on Earth? Beings made of light and thought? A connection to everything that transcended physical senses? Our language wasn't built for these concepts. Plus, my physical recovery continued. 3 months after arriving at Walter Reed, I was fitted for my first set of prosthetic legs. Basic models, not the sophisticated ones they have today, but they would allow me to stand, to walk with crutches, to begin reclaiming some independence. The first time I stood on them was both triumphant and humbling. Triumphant because it felt like a miracle to be upright again. Humbling because it was so difficult, so exhausting, so far from the fluid movement I'd once taken for granted. Small steps. Captain Rodriguez reminded me as I struggled to balance. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is learning to walk again. My parents had returned to Michigan by then, but called constantly for updates. My mother wanted me to come home to Lansing once I was discharged, to let her take care of me. The thought was simultaneously comforting and suffocating. I need to figure this out on my own, Mom. I told her during one call. I can't come home and be a kid again. But you need help, Richard, she said, her voice breaking. Those things they gave you. She couldn't bring herself to say prosthetic legs. You can barely walk with them. I'll get better, I said with more confidence than I felt. Just need practice. My father got on the line. Your mother's worried sick, but I understand. A man needs his independence. Just know our door is always open, son. Always. As my body slowly healed, I found myself increasingly isolated mentally. I couldn't share my most profound experience, my death and what came after, in any meaningful way. The few times I tried, I was met with polite nods, clinical explanations, or religious interpretations that missed the point entirely. A Catholic chaplain visited the ward regularly. Father McKenna was an elderly man with a gentle manner who'd served as a chaplain in Korea. When I tried to tell him about my experience, he listened more openly than most. God works in mysterious ways, he said when I finished. Perhaps he gave you a glimpse of the afterlife as a gift. But it wasn't like heaven as the church describes it, I said. There was no judgment, no pearly gates, no hell that I could see. Just continuation, evolution of consciousness, everyone connected to the same source. He smiled kindly. The human mind can't fully comprehend God's realm. What you saw may have been filtered through your own understanding. Or maybe our religions only have pieces of the truth, I suggested. Maybe they're all just different perspectives on something much bigger. Father McKenna's smile tightened slightly. Faith requires humility, son. We must trust in the wisdom of the church. Even he, with all his compassion, couldn't fully hear what I was trying to say. No one could. I began to understand the cost. My great-grandmother had mentioned the isolation of living between worlds, of knowing things others didn't. 6 months after the explosion, I was finally discharged from Walter Reed. Not fully recovered, I would need ongoing physical therapy and medical care, but well enough to begin rebuilding some kind of civilian life. The question was, what kind of life? Where would I go? What would I do? I'd been planning to return to college after Vietnam, finish my engineering degree. But now, everything had changed. I had changed. In the end, I compromised with my parents. I would come home to Michigan, but not to live with them. The VA helped me get a small apartment in East Lansing, near the university. I would take classes part-time while continuing my rehabilitation. It seemed like a reasonable plan. The journey home was an education in itself. People stared at the young man with crutches and the strange, stiff gait. Some looked away quickly. Others stared too long. A few, mostly older veterans who recognized what my injuries meant, nodded with respect. My hometown felt simultaneously familiar and alien. The streets I'd grown up on were the same, but I viewed them through different eyes now. Eyes that had seen death and what lay beyond it. The mundane concerns of civilian life, lawn care, shopping, television shows, seemed trivial in comparison to the vastness I'd glimpsed. My parents had arranged a small welcome home gathering. Just family and a few close friends. My brother had made it back from the oil rig. My Uncle George, who'd served in the Pacific with my dad. My high school buddy Steve, who'd failed his physical due to asthma and spent the war in college. A couple of neighbors who'd known me since childhood. They were all so careful around me, tiptoeing verbally, avoiding certain topics, treating me like I might shatter if they said the wrong thing. I hated it but understood it. They didn't know how to relate to me anymore. I was a living reminder of the war most of them only saw in the evening news. I moved into my apartment a week later. First floor, thankfully. The VA had arranged for some modifications. Grab bars in the bathroom, lower counters in the kitchen. It wasn't great, but it was mine. A place to rebuild. I enrolled in 2 classes at Michigan State for the winter term. Introduction to Philosophy and American Literature. Nothing related to engineering. I couldn't explain why, but technical subjects no longer held any appeal. I wanted to explore questions of meaning, of consciousness, of human experience. My first day on campus was surreal. Students hurried between buildings, laughing, arguing, fully immersed in their lives. Many wore peace symbols, long hair, tie-dyed shirts, the uniform of the anti-war movement. And there I was, hair still military short, moving awkwardly on prosthetics that could never be disguised, the war's cost written on my body. Some students stared, others pointedly didn't look. A few made comments just loud enough for me to hear. Baby killer, war criminal, fascist tool. I didn't respond. What could I say? That I'd never killed any babies? That I'd just been a kid following orders? That I'd died and seen beyond this physical reality to a place where such divisions meant nothing? None of it would matter to them. I was a symbol, not a person. The philosophy class was taught by a Professor Chambers, a bearded man in his 50s with wire-rimmed glasses, who reminded me somewhat of my grandfather. The first day, he outlined the course. We'll be examining fundamental questions of existence. What is reality? What is consciousness? What is the self? Is there meaning to life? And if so, what is it? I found myself smiling for what felt like the first time in months. These were exactly the questions I needed to explore. After class, I approached his desk. Professor Chambers, I was wondering if you have any readings specifically about near-death experiences or consciousness beyond the physical body. He looked at me with interest. That's a rather specific request. We will touch on various theories of consciousness, including some Eastern perspectives that address continuation after death. Is there a particular reason for your interest? I hesitated. Should I tell him? Would he dismiss me like the others had? I had an experience, I said finally, when I was injured in Vietnam. I was clinically dead for several minutes, and I experienced something that doesn't fit with conventional explanations. I expected the usual dismissive nod, the psychological explanation. Instead, he leaned forward, genuinely interested. I've been collecting accounts of such experiences for several years. He said, there are fascinating consistencies across cultures and time periods. Would you be willing to share your experience with me sometime? For my research? For the first time since returning, I felt a glimmer of hope. Someone was willing to listen, really listen. Yes, I said. I'd like that. The winter of 1968 to 69 was one of the coldest on record in Michigan. Snow piled high and the wind cut like a knife. Getting around campus on prosthetics in those conditions was a special kind of hell. I fell more times than I could count. Sometimes people helped me up. Sometimes they walked past as if I were invisible. I met with Professor Chambers several times that winter, telling him everything I could remember about my experience in the borderlands. He took detailed notes, asked thoughtful questions, never once suggested it was just a hallucination or delusion. Your account has remarkable similarities to others I've collected. He told me during one of our meetings. The sense of expanded consciousness, the encounter with deceased relatives, the access to greater knowledge, the feeling of universal connection, these elements appear repeatedly across very different cases. What do you think it means? I asked. He removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully before responding. I think it means our current scientific paradigm is incomplete. That consciousness may be more fundamental than we currently believe. Not simply an emergent property of the brain, but perhaps something the brain channels or constrains rather than creates. Yes, I said, perhaps too eagerly. That's it exactly. It's like our physical existence is just one channel, one frequency of a much broader spectrum of consciousness. He smiled. A good analogy. The question becomes, why don't we normally perceive these other frequencies? Why does it typically require extreme circumstances, like clinical death, to access them? My grandfather said something about forgetting. I recalled that forgetting our true nature is part of the physical experience, that the limitations create a particular kind of intensity. Fascinating, Chambers said, making more notes. That aligns with certain mystical traditions, the Vedic concept of Maya, the Buddhist notion of attachment to illusion. The idea that we are, in essence, spiritual beings having a physical experience, rather than physical beings having occasional spiritual experiences. Talking with Professor Chambers helped me articulate what I'd experienced in ways I hadn't been able to before. He introduced me to books and philosophical concepts that resonated with what I'd seen. Works by William James, Carl Jung, Eastern religious texts, even some of the more thoughtful Western mystics. I threw myself into this study with an intensity that surprised me. Here finally was a way to make sense of what had happened to me. a framework for understanding the message I'd been sent back with. My other class, American Literature, proved unexpectedly relevant as well. We read Emerson and Thoreau, with their transcendentalist view of nature and the divine. We studied Walt Whitman, whose Leaves of Grass expressed a cosmic consciousness that reminded me of what I'd glimpsed. Even Emily Dickinson, with her intimate relationship with death, offered insights that paralleled my own experience. For all the intellectual stimulation, though, my daily life remained challenging. Physical therapy was grueling. The phantom pain persisted, sometimes just an itch in toes I no longer had, sometimes shooting agony that woke me screaming in the night. The VA doctors prescribed various medications, but most made me foggy, disconnected, which I hated. I preferred the pain to the numbness. Social connections were equally difficult. I didn't fit with the anti-war students, obviously, but I also felt disconnected from the few other veterans on campus. They were dealing with their own traumas, their own adjustments, and the last thing most of them wanted to talk about was death and spiritual experiences. I tried dating once that winter, a girl from my literature class named Susan, who seemed genuinely interested in me despite my disability. We went to a movie, had coffee after. The conversation was pleasant enough. She asked about Vietnam, but in that careful way civilians did, not really wanting the true answer. What was the worst part? She asked, thinking, I suppose, that I would talk about my injury. Coming back, I said without thinking. Her face showed confusion. What do you mean? How could I explain? That I'd glimpsed a reality where all souls were connected, where love was the fundamental force, where our physical divisions meant nothing, and then been thrust back into a world of war protests and racial tension and political hatred? That I now lived with one foot in each world, belonging fully to neither? Just adjusting to civilian life, I said lamely. It's different. We didn't go out again. I didn't blame her. I was poor company, too absorbed in my own internal journey to be truly present for someone else. Spring came finally. The snow melted, making getting around campus easier. I continued my studies, my meetings with Professor Chambers, my physical therapy. I was walking better now, relying less on crutches, though I still couldn't manage long distances. In April, almost exactly a year after the explosion, I received a letter from Bennett, our medic. He was back in the States now, discharged and attending medical school in California. Still can't believe you made it, Deli, he wrote. When I was working on you after that mine hit, I knew you were gone. Your pulse stopped. Your pupils were fixed. You weren't breathing. I called it, man. I actually called time of death. Then Pacheco got hit by sniper fire while we were waiting for the dust-off, and all hell broke loose. By the time the chopper arrived, you'd somehow started breathing again. Weakly, but definitely breathing. Never seen anything like it. The docs at the field hospital couldn't explain it either. Whatever happened, I'm glad you're still with us. His letter was a validation I hadn't realized I needed. Confirmation that I had truly died. That my return wasn't just some hallucination brought on by trauma. I had been gone. And I had come back. I wrote back, thanking him for trying to save me, expressing condolences about Lieutenant Pacheco. I briefly mentioned having experienced something while I was out, but didn't go into detail. From experience, I knew how it would likely be received. As the academic year ended, I had to decide what to do next. I'd completed my 2 classes successfully, but the question of my future loomed large. Should I continue with school? Try to find work? And in either case, doing what? The message I'd been sent back with, about the nature of reality, about our interconnectedness, about what awaited beyond death, still burned within me. But how was I supposed to share it? Who would listen? I discussed it with Professor Chambers during our final meeting of the semester. I feel like I was given this knowledge for a reason. I told him, like I'm supposed to do something with it, but I don't know what. He considered this thoughtfully. There are many ways to share wisdom, Richard. Teaching, writing, simply living as an example of what you know to be true. The right path will present itself if you remain open to it. But will anyone actually hear what I'm saying? Every time I try to explain, people either think I'm crazy or try to fit what I'm saying into their existing beliefs. That's the eternal challenge of those who've glimpsed deeper truths, he said with a smile. You can't force understanding on others. You can only plant seeds and hope they eventually take root. I nodded, not fully satisfied, but appreciative of his perspective. What will you do now? He asked. I'm not sure. Keep studying, I think. Keep trying to understand what I experienced. Find better ways to articulate it. If you're interested, he said, I'm hosting a small symposium this summer on consciousness research. Very informal, just a few colleagues from various fields, psychology, philosophy, religious studies, even a quantum physicist. Your perspective would be valuable. You want me to speak? To academics? About my near-death experience? Yes. These particular academics are open-minded, I assure you. They're interested in pushing beyond current paradigms, exploring the frontiers of consciousness. I hesitated. Public speaking had never been my forte, and the thought of sharing something so personal, so profound with strangers was intimidating. But wasn't this exactly what I'd been looking for? A chance to share my message with people who might actually listen? Okay, I said finally. I'll do it. As the symposium was held in late June at Professor Chambers' Lakeside Cottage, about an hour from East Lansing. There were 12 participants in total. The professor, myself, and 10 others from various universities around the country. Some were established academics, others graduate students or independent researchers. I was nervous as hell. These people had advanced degrees, published papers, engaged with these ideas professionally. What could I, a wounded veteran with barely a year of college, possibly contribute? Professor Chambers must have sensed my anxiety. As we gathered on his screen porch that first evening, drinks in hand, he deliberately steered the conversation away from academic credentials. We're here to share insights, not compare CVS, he said. Some of the most profound wisdom comes from direct experience rather than formal study. Over dinner, I listened more than I spoke, trying to get a feel for these people. Dr. Eleanor West was a psychologist who specialized in altered states of consciousness. Dr. Michael Chen was the quantum physicist. There was a neurologist, an anthropologist who'd studied shamanic practices, a theologian, a philosopher, and several graduate students from various disciplines. They talked about consciousness in ways I'd never heard before, as a field rather than a product, as something potentially separate from, but interactive with the brain, as possibly fundamental to the universe rather than an evolutionary afterthought. After dinner, we moved to a circle of chairs around a fire pit by the lake. The night was warm, stars brilliant overhead, the water lapping gently at the shore. Professor Chambers asked each person to briefly share what had brought them to the study of consciousness. When my turn came, I took a deep breath and told my story. The explosion, the clinical death, the journey to the borderlands, what I'd learned there. I didn't hold back, didn't sanitize it for academic palatability. I just spoke my truth as clearly as I could. When I finished, there was silence except for the crackling of the fire. I braced myself for the dismissal, the rationalization, the psychological explanation. Instead, Dr. West leaned forward. Thank you for sharing that, she said. The consistency between your experience and other NDEs I've studied is remarkable, particularly the sense of expanded consciousness in the encounter with deceased relatives. I'm interested in the apparent physics of this other realm. Doctor, Chen said, you described it as fluid, responsive to thought or intention. That aligns with certain quantum models of reality at the fundamental level. The theologian, Dr. Harper, nodded thoughtfully. The essence of your message, that love is fundamental, that we are all connected to a greater whole, is remarkably consistent with the mystical traditions within all major religions, stripped of their dogmatic elements. One by one, they engaged with what I'd shared, not dismissing it, not explaining it away, but taking it seriously as data, as experience worthy of consideration. They asked thoughtful questions. They related it to their own research. They treated me as a colleague, not a curiosity. For the first time since my return, I felt fully heard, fully seen. And in that acceptance, something inside me began to heal. Not my physical wounds, but the deeper wound of isolation, of being caught between worlds with no one to truly share either with. The symposium continued for 3 days. We discussed consciousness from every angle, scientific, philosophical, spiritual. We shared meals, went swimming in the lake, stayed up late debating fine points of phenomenology or quantum theory. On the final night, as we again sat around the fire, Professor Chambers posed a question. Given everything we've discussed, what do we each feel is the most important frontier for consciousness research? When my turn came, I spoke from the heart, finding ways to bridge the gap between direct experience and scientific understanding, between the mystical and the empirical. Because until we can do that, people like me, people who've glimpsed something beyond our normal reality, will always struggle to be heard and understood. Dr. Chen snapped his fingers. That's it exactly. We need a new language, a new framework that allows both the subjective and objective to be valued equally. Perhaps, said the anthropologist Dr. Rivera, we need to learn from traditions that have never separated them in the first place. Indigenous knowledge systems often integrate what we call mystical experience into their understanding of reality without contradiction. As the discussion continued, I felt a growing clarity about my own path forward. The message I'd been given wasn't meant to be delivered like a sermon imposed from above. It needed to be offered as a perspective, a data point, a personal truth that others could engage with on their own terms. When the symposium ended, several participants urged me to write about my experience. Dr. West offered to introduce me to a publisher she knew who specialized in consciousness studies. Dr. Harper invited me to speak at a theological conference he was organizing. Professor Chambers suggested I consider transferring to a program that would allow me to study consciousness more formally. I returned to East Lansing with a new sense of purpose. I would continue my education, focusing on philosophy and religious studies. I would write about my experience as honestly and clearly as I could. I would speak to those willing to listen, not to convert or convince, but to share what I'd learned in the hopes it might be useful to others on their own journeys. Long pause. That was over 50 years ago now, a lifetime. My journey since then has been long and winding, with its share of successes and failures, joys and sorrows. I did finish my education, not in engineering as I'd originally planned, but in comparative religion and philosophy. Eventually earned a PhD, though that was never my primary goal. The understanding was what mattered, not the credentials. I wrote my first book, Beyond the Light, A Soldier's Journey Through Death and Back, in 1975. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its audience. People who'd had similar experiences, people who'd lost loved ones and sought comfort, people genuinely curious about the nature of consciousness and reality. I've written several more since then, spoken at conferences, taught occasional university courses. I married rather late in my 40s, a wonderful woman named Claire, who'd had her own profound spiritual experience during a severe illness. We understood each other in ways others couldn't. She passed 10 years ago, and while I miss her physical presence deeply, I feel her consciousness still connected to mine, still part of the greater whole we both glimpsed. We never had children of our own, but I've mentored many young people over the years. Students, other veterans, people who've had their own NDEs and struggled to integrate them. In some ways, that feels like my most important work, helping others navigate the challenge of living with one foot in ordinary reality and one in the greater truth. My body has aged, of course. The prosthetics have improved dramatically over the decades, from the clumsy, painful ones I first received to the sophisticated models I use now. Still not as good as flesh and blood, but far better than what was available in 1968. The phantom pain never fully disappeared, though it diminished over time. Sometimes I wonder if it's a reminder, a physical tether to that moment of transition, that threshold between worlds. As for the message I was sent back with, that what lies beyond is greater and stranger than any religion has captured, that we are all connected in ways we barely comprehend, that love is the fundamental force of reality, I've tried to honor it, to live it, to share it without imposing it. Some have heard, some haven't. Some have twisted it to fit their existing beliefs. Others have rejected it entirely. That's the nature of human consciousness. We receive information through the filters of our own experiences, our own fears and desires. But I've noticed a change over these decades. When I first tried to talk about my experience in 1968, almost no one was willing to listen with an open mind. Now, conversations about consciousness beyond the brain, about the limitations of materialism, about the possibility of survival after death, these are happening in mainstream science, in philosophy departments, even in some religious contexts. The world seems more ready for this message now than it was when I returned with it. Whether that's due to my small contribution or simply the natural evolution of human understanding, I can't say. Perhaps both. Perhaps neither. Perhaps, as my great-grandmother might say, it's all part of the pattern. What I do know is this. That experience in 1968, dying, traveling to the borderlands and returning, defined my life in ways I never could have imagined as that young soldier walking point in the Vietnamese jungle. The physical cost was high. The emotional and spiritual journey was challenging. But I wouldn't trade it. Not for an ordinary life with all limbs intact and no knowledge of what waits beyond. Because once you've seen behind the veil, once you've experienced the vastness, the connectedness, the fundamental love that underlies reality, you can never again take this physical existence quite so seriously. Its dramas and conflicts, its political divisions and cultural battles all seem like children squabbling in a playground, unaware of the vaster reality surrounding them. That doesn't mean this life doesn't matter. It does, profoundly. Every choice, every interaction, every moment of kindness or cruelty ripples outward, affecting the whole in ways we can barely comprehend. But it means we can engage with life with both passion and perspective, caring deeply while remembering that this physical reality is just one facet of a much greater existence. But I still dream about the borderlands sometimes. In these dreams, I walk with my grandfather through landscapes of light, or converse with my great-grandmother about the patterns of existence. I visit the Library of Lives, the Healing Center, the preparation areas where souls ready themselves for incarnation. Each time I wake with renewed certainty about what awaits us all, not judgment or punishment, not eternal paradise or damnation, but continuation, evolution. Return to a greater consciousness we temporarily stepped away from to have this focused, limited, intense human experience. And each time I feel a profound gratitude for life despite its hardships, for death despite its mysteries, for the chance to be a conscious participant in this grand, beautiful, sometimes terrible, but always meaningful dance of existence. That's really the heart of the message I was sent back with. When you strip away all the philosophical language and mystical concepts, that life continues, that we are all connected, that love endures beyond death. If there's anything I hope you take from my story, it's this. Don't wait until you've had your own near-death experience to recognize these truths. They're available now in this life if you're willing to look beyond the surface of things, to question your assumptions about reality, to open yourself to possibilities beyond what your physical senses report. The veil between worlds is thinner than most of us believe. And what waits on the other side isn't something to fear, but something to recognize as our true home. A place we've temporarily left to have this human adventure, and a place to which we will all, eventually, return. Not as strangers, but as travelers coming back to where we began, changed by our journey but welcome nonetheless. Coming home,